Chapter 1. The lights over the ceremony floor burn white, and Tavian Reed is already reaching for my brother's hand before I understand what I am watching. I stand at the edge of the platform in my father's cuff links, the silver cold against my wrists, and I wait for a name that never comes. Corin's face goes pale under the light. He did not expect this. I can see that much even through the roaring in my own ears. But expecting it or not, his fingers close around Tavian's, and 2 years of midnight visits, 2 years of a man telling me he loved me with his mouth against my hair, end in less time than it takes the pack elders to murmur their approval. Nobody looks at me. That is the worst part. 300 wolves in this hall, and not one turns to see the Omega standing where a claimed mate should be standing, because as far as Cedar Harbor is concerned, I was never really there. I make it 4 steps toward the side door before the air changes. It hits low. First, a pressure against my chest like something enormous just leaned its weight into the room. Every head turns at once, and mine turns with them, my whole body moving before my mind catches up. The doors at the far end are thrown open, and men in Western Crown colors pour through them fast. Too fast. The kind of fast that means something has already gone wrong somewhere else and they are only now catching up to it. Alpha Regent Kale Arden walks through the center of that chaos like he is the only steady thing in the building, and he is not steady at all. I see it before anyone else does, because reading collapse in a body is what I do for a living. His jaw is locked too tight. His hand finds the back of a chair and grips it like the floor might tilt. His guards are talking over each other, using words like fever and refusal and hours, and none of it explains why every wolf between us drops its head as he passes. Then he looks at me. I have never been looked at like that in my life. Not by Tavian, who always looked at me like something to protect and hide in the same breath. This is different. This is a man's face going through shock, recognition, and something closer to grief, all in the space of one held breath. My own wolf, silent for 25 years, silent through every insult about my useless scent and my unfinished shift, sits up inside my chest like it has been asleep and just heard its name called. I hear one word, and I do not know if he said it or if I only felt it. Mate. The hall goes to noise around us. Meredith Reed is already moving, sliding a folder off the registry table and into her sleeve so smooth that only someone watching for exactly that kind of theft would catch it, and I am watching because some old habit in me never stopped watching her. Corin has not let go of Tavian's hand, but his eyes are on me, wide and frightened in a way that does not match a man who just won the best match in Cedar Harbor. Kale's guards move to close ranks around him, the way guards do when they are more afraid of what he might do than what might be done to him. He waves them back with 2 fingers, barely a gesture, and it works instantly, and that tells me more about his authority than anything else in the room. He does not walk toward me the way an alpha claims a mate in front of witnesses, and I brace myself for it anyway, for the hand closing around my wrist, for my name being spoken over the room like an announcement I never agreed to. He stops 3 feet away instead, close enough that I can smell what's wrong with him now, cedar and cold air, and under both, something scorched, something that should not be part of a living scent at all. May I speak with you? He says, quiet enough that only I catch it. Somewhere private, not a command, a question, offered like it costs him something to ask it while his own knees are threatening to give out in front of 300 witnesses. I should say no. Every rational piece of me knows I should walk past him and out the side door and let the Western Crown solve its own crisis somewhere that isn't Cedar Harbor's most humiliating night of my life. Instead, I hear myself say yes. A guard leads us through a side corridor while the ceremony behind us dissolves into whispers about the defective Omega and the collapsing Regent leaving together. My hands are steady. My hands are always steady because a body in crisis needs someone whose hands do not shake, and I have spent 6 years training mine not to. His hands are not steady. The moment the door closes behind us and the noise of the hall cuts off, Kale's grip finds the edge of a table, and he goes down onto it more than he sits, breath tearing out of him like he has been holding it since he walked in. I move without thinking, my palm against his sternum, feeling the wrongness under his skin. A wolf pulsing weak and thin like a heartbeat caught in static. How long? I ask. He looks at me with eyes gone glassy at the edges, and for 1 second the most powerful alpha in the Western Territories looks like a man who has not slept in longer than he can remember. 18 months, he says. My wolf has been dying for 18 months. His hand closes around my wrist, gentle, asking rather than taking. It just moved, he says. For you. Chapter 2. Blood is running down the inside of Kale's wrist before I get his sleeve pushed back. And none of his guards seem to have noticed he clawed himself in his sleep. I am in a medical room 3 floors under the ceremony hall, the one the Western Crown physicians set up in less than 20 minutes, and Kale is on the table with restraints hanging loose and unused at the corners because I told them I would not treat a man like an animal in a cage. His eyes are open but not seeing me yet, caught somewhere behind them in a place that smells like smoke even though there is no smoke here. Kale, I say, and something in my voice reaches him before my hands do. He blinks and the room comes back into his face, and the first thing he does, before he asks where he is or what happened, is check that his hand is not still gripping mine too hard. He lets go the instant he confirms it, even though I never asked him to. You're bleeding, I tell him, and press gauze against the shallow lines on his forearm. It's nothing. It's something you did to yourself. That makes it my business. A ghost of something crosses his face. Not quite a smile, more like the memory of one. His scent is still wrong up close, cedar and winter air with that burned edge underneath, but it is quieter now than it was in the hall, like my hands on his skin are pressing the static down. You didn't have to come, he says. You didn't have to ask instead of just claiming me in front of the whole pack. I say. Most alphas your rank wouldn't have bothered. I'm not most alphas. I'm learning that. His eyes track my hands as I work, careful, deliberate, watching the way I check his pulse against his wrist rather than just watching my face. And I realize somewhere in the last few minutes he has started treating me like a person doing a job instead of a mate he is owed. It is such a small thing. It should not feel like the first kindness anyone has shown me in 2 years. I ask him about the sleep. He tells me the truth without making me pull it out of him, which surprises me more than it should. 18 months without a full night. Sedatives that trigger violent partial shifts instead of rest. Every closed eye dropping him back into a burning building he has never set foot inside. 27 voices he never met, calling for a door he did not open in time. I gave the order to wait, he says, flat, like reciting a fact that stopped hurting so much it became just a fact. For confirmation. By the time it came, the roof had already gone. I do not tell him it wasn't his fault. I don't know yet if that's true, and he would smell the lie anyway. Instead, I tell him about a baker. Not a hero. Not a legend. A man in a coastal town who lost his whole shop to a flood and reopened 3 months later in a building half its size, using half his old recipes because he couldn't afford the rest of the ingredients, and how the regulars came anyway and told him the bread tasted the same, even though it didn't, because what they actually missed was him standing behind the counter. I don't know why I tell him that story instead of 100 others I know. Something about his face asks for something small, something survivable. His breathing changes around the 3rd minute. By the 5th, his eyes are closed. By the 7th, he is asleep, actually asleep, his hand loose around the edge of my sleeve like he grabbed it without deciding to and forgot to let go. The 2 guards by the door stare like they are watching a myth happen in front of them. One of them actually reaches for a communication device before the other one grabs his arm and shakes his head. Hard. Don't you dare wake him. 7 minutes. That is all it lasts. He surfaces with a gasp, disoriented, and the first thing his hand does is release my sleeve like he's been caught doing something shameful. I'm sorry, he says immediately. I didn't mean to. You didn't do anything wrong. I don't sleep around people. I haven't in months. I don't know why. Kale. He stops. You needed rest. I have rest to give. That isn't a debt. He studies me for a long moment, something working behind his eyes that I can't read yet, and then his gaze drops to my wrist, to the cuff link catching the light there, the small worn silver piece with its faint engraved insignia. His whole body goes still in a different way than before, a stillness that has nothing to do with exhaustion. Where did you get that? He says, and his voice is changed, gone careful in a way that makes my pulse pick up before I understand why. It was my father's. That insignia, Kale says slowly, each word landing heavier than the last, belongs to a shelter that officially had no survivors. The room goes very quiet. Even the two guards by the door have stopped pretending they are not listening, their eyes moving between the two of us like they can feel the temperature dropping. I look down at the cuff link myself, at the small scratched surface I have worn every day since my father's funeral without once wondering what it actually meant. It was just his. That was reason enough to wear it. Now Cale is looking at it like it is a piece of evidence in a case he has spent 18 months trying not to reopen. "Why?" he asks. "Are you wearing the mark of a place where everyone died?" Chapter 3. No survivors is not the same as no one who mattered. And I say that out loud before I decide to, watching Cale's face for the flinch I expect. He doesn't flinch. He goes still instead, the kind of still that means something in him just cracked open a door it had bolted shut a long time ago. "My father wore this before me," I say, turning the cuff link between my fingers. "He worked emergency response. He never told me which shelter. He never told me much of anything about that year. He died when I was 19, and I inherited a box of his things and a scent that never worked right, and that's the whole story I have." "It isn't the whole story," Cale says. Neither of us says anything else about it that night. He is still too raw, and I am still holding a man's pulse under my palm, and there is only so much a body can carry before it needs to sleep instead of grieve. But something has shifted between us, some door standing open where before there was only a wall. 2 days later, I am standing outside a temporary residence the Western Crown built at the edge of Cedar Harbor territory, my bag in one hand and 4 conditions written out on a folded piece of paper in the other. "No permanent mating claim," I read aloud, because I want him to hear it in my voice, not just read it off the page. "No unsupervised scent exposure during unstable episodes. No touching without permission. I remain a medical consultant, not a mate, not property." Cale takes the paper, reads it once, and hands it back. "Agreed," he says. "All of it." I expected an argument. Every alpha I have ever treated argues about at least one condition, usually the touching one. Cale doesn't blink. The residence is smaller than I pictured, more house than palace, which tells me he chose it on purpose, some quiet rebellion against the version of himself that has to perform authority in front of the whole territory. During the day I watch him become someone else entirely, a man who sits across from pack representatives and dismantles bad arguments in 4 sentences, who does not raise his voice because he has never needed to. His guards move around him like satellites. Even Marith, when she visits under the excuse of registry business, keeps a careful distance, though I catch her watching me longer than she watches anyone else in the room. At night, he becomes someone I recognize better. We sit at the kitchen table, sorting dried roots for a calming infusion, and his hands, so certain when they are signing orders, fumble with the smaller stems like they belong to a different person. I reach over to correct his grip, my fingers brushing his, and I feel the exact moment his whole body wants to close that distance and doesn't. He steps back instead. Physically steps back, chair scraping, putting a foot of space between us that neither of us asked for out loud. "You don't have to do that," I say. "I told you I wouldn't use it," he says. "Whatever's happening between us." I meant it. I know you meant it. I'm saying I noticed. He looks at me for a long moment, something almost like disbelief in his face, like he expected to have to prove himself for months before I gave him that much credit. I tell him another story that night. An elderly beta, decades past the age anyone expects a late shift, finally managing it in front of a crowd that had long since stopped believing it would happen. Cale laughs partway through, actually laughs, low and rusty like the sound surprises him as much as it surprises me, and something in his sense settles when he does it, the burned edge fading just slightly under the cedar. He sleeps 23 minutes that night. When he wakes gasping, hand already moving to apologize for whatever he thinks he's done wrong, I catch his wrist before the apology finishes forming. Needing help isn't the same as using someone, I tell him. The difference is whether the person helping had a choice. I have one. I'm making it. Tavian tries to find me the next afternoon, catching me near the residence gate with an urgency in his face I haven't seen from him in over a year, like there is something he has been carrying that he can no longer hold alone. His eyes are red-rimmed, and for a second I almost let myself feel sorry for him. The way I used to whenever he showed up at my door after a hard patrol looking like the world had asked too much of him. Avon, I need to tell you something. He starts. About why I. Marith appears from nowhere, smooth and unbothered, steering the conversation somewhere else entirely before he can finish the sentence. She doesn't even glance at me. She simply places a hand on her son's arm and asks him a question about the registry schedule. And just like that, whatever he meant to say folds itself back down inside him, the way it always has. That night, back at the clinic to check on a patient, I pull my own file out of habit the way I have 100 times before. Pages are missing. Not damaged. Removed cleanly, the kind of gap that only shows up if you know exactly how many pages should be there. My designation results. Changed less than a month after my father's funeral. I am still staring at the gap where my own file should be when the royal physician finds me in the hallway, her face carrying the particular calm of someone about to say something she has rehearsed. There's something you and the Regent need to know, she says, about what's forming between you. Chapter 4. What's forming between us turns out to mean something the physician calls an incomplete mate pathway, and she explains it with the careful, clinical distance of someone who has rehearsed how to deliver bad news without sounding like she's delivering it. Every time I calm Kale's wolf, the pathway strengthens. It isn't a full bond. Not yet. But it is building itself whether either of us agreed to it or not, one sentence, one story, one shared sleep at a time. I don't tell Kale that night. I'm still turning it over myself, still deciding what it means, and some old habit in me wants to understand a thing fully before I hand it to someone else to worry about. Instead, I sit across from him at the kitchen table again, and he asks me a question no one has asked me in longer than I can remember. What do you want? He says. When you're not fixing someone else? I open my mouth to answer and nothing comes out, because I genuinely do not know. My whole life has been organized around being useful. Corin got to be beautiful and admired. I got to be needed, and I built an entire identity out of that scrap, convinced myself it was enough, and now a man is asking me what I want and I am sitting here with nothing to give him. I don't know, I finally say, and it feels like admitting something shameful. That's all right, Kale says. You don't have to know tonight. I tell him a story instead, easier ground, about an elderly beta who spent decades believing something about his own body that turned out to be wrong. Kale sleeps through the whole night this time, one loose hand curled around my sleeve, and I sit beside him for hours watching the tension leave his face by degrees, and somewhere in those hours I understand that I am not falling for him because our wolves recognize each other. I am falling for him because he keeps trying to do the right thing even when he is exhausted and frightened and has every excuse not to. I don't sleep much myself that night, even with Kale resting beside me for once instead of the other way around. I keep thinking about the physician's words about a pathway building itself with or without our permission, and I wonder how many choices in my life have actually been mine and how many were only ever the illusion of one, dressed up nicely enough that I stopped questioning it. Corin finds me the next morning, slipping into the residence garden before anyone official notices he's there. I didn't know, he says immediately, before I can even ask. Avon, I swear to you, I didn't know he was going to choose me. I saw your face and I wanted to say something right there in front of everyone and I didn't, and I've hated myself for 2 days straight because I didn't. Then why haven't you rejected it? He doesn't answer right away, and that silence tells me more than anything he could say. Marith is threatening the clinic, he finally admits. If I refuse the contract now, she says she'll cut its funding within the month. I didn't know how to tell you that without making it your problem too. It's already my problem, I say. It's been my problem since the day she started controlling both our lives and calling it tradition. He leaves without an answer for that, and I go back inside to find something to do with my hands, because sitting with my own anger has never worked for me the way motion does. That's when I finally look closely at the cuff link again, turning it under the kitchen light, running my thumb over the small scratched surface I have touched 1,000 times without really seeing. There's a seam I never noticed, a hairline gap along the inside edge of the fastening, so fine it looks like wear until I press it and feel it give slightly under my thumbnail. Engraved into the hidden underside, small enough that I need the light angled just right to read it.
27 Cộng Hòa.
I don't know what it means yet, but the numbers sit wrong in my stomach immediately, 27 pressing against something I already half know. Hollis, when I bring it to him at the clinic, goes pale in a way I have never seen from my steady, unshakable mentor. He says slowly. That's the old emergency registry code. Cedar Harbor used it decades ago, before they switched systems. He looks at the numbers again. 27 and 9. 27 is the official death count from the shelter fire. I say, what's 9? Neither of us has an answer. Hollis pulls out an old ledger from a locked cabinet behind his desk, flipping through pages gone soft with age, and finds nothing, no record of the code anywhere he can access. Only a note in the margin from years ago that reads simply "See Restricted Archive," with no further explanation and no signature. That night, Cale wakes screaming before I can even get the story started, thrashing against a nightmare stronger than any I've pulled him out of before, and when I finally get my hands on him, get my voice into whatever place he's trapped in, he grabs my wrist so hard it will bruise and looks at me with eyes that don't fully recognize me yet. I saw him, Cale says, breathing hard, still half inside the fire, carrying children out. A man built like you. I've seen him in every version of that memory since the day it happened, and I never understood why. He looks at me fully now, present, terrified in a different way than the nightmare terror. Avon, he says, your father was inside that building the night I ordered my soldiers to wait. Chapter 5. The restricted archive is smaller than I expected. One locked room under the Cedar Harbor Registry office that Hollis has clearance to enter and I technically don't, though he doesn't hesitate before letting me in anyway. The file matching the code takes almost an hour to find. When Hollis finally pulls it, his hands are shaking in a way I've never seen from him. Not once in 6 years of working beside him through the worst emergencies our clinic has handled. 27 official deaths. That number never changes, printed in every version of the report I have ever heard referenced. But this file, the real one, buried under a code almost nobody remembers, lists 9 additional names under a single heading. Escaped, unregistered exit, maintenance tunnel. My father's name is listed as the medic who guided them out. He was never officially there. He volunteered, unregistered, crossing into disputed territory before the Royal soldiers had clearance to move. Because a man doesn't wait for paperwork when a building is burning with people inside it. 9 people lived because of him. The official record erased every one of them along with him. I don't understand why until Hollis explains it, voice low even though we're alone. The survivors could identify which officials caused the delay. Keeping them erased kept the truth erased along with them. I read the 9 names twice, then a third time, waiting for one of them to feel familiar, and none of them do. Strangers my father saved and never told me about. A whole chapter of his life folded away and buried under a code I only found because of a scratch on a piece of silver he wore every day without explanation. Why didn't he ever say anything? I ask, mostly to myself. Because saying it would have put a target on every name in this file, Hollis says. Including yours, eventually. Some silences are protection. Avon. Not all of them are cowardice. I think about that longer than I mean to, because it sounds uncomfortably close to something I might one day have to say about somebody else. I bring the file to Cale that evening, and he goes still reading it, the same stillness I saw the first night he recognized the cuff link, except deeper now, like something in him is recalculating 18 months of guilt against 9 names he never knew existed. Before either of us can say much else, the royal physician arrives with results from a deeper scan of the pathway between us, and whatever relief the file gave Cale disappears from his face within a minute of her speaking. A complete bond, she explains, would let me absorb what's wrong with him entirely. His wolf would recover. Mine would take on the damage in his place, the fractured sleep, the recurring memory, and eventually, if left unmanaged, neurological scent collapse severe enough to be fatal. Cale doesn't ask a single question. He simply stands and tells the physician to end our sessions immediately. We haven't looked at alternatives. I say. There's nothing to look at. I won't trade your life for mine. That's not your decision to make alone. It is when the alternative is watching you die for me. I feel something old and familiar crack open in my chest. The exact shape of every time an alpha decided what I could and couldn't survive without bothering to ask me first. Tavian did it with silence. Cale is doing it with control dressed up as protection, and somehow that version stings worse because I let myself believe he was different. You're doing exactly what he did, I say. You're just calling it something nobler. Something moves across his face, sharp and wounded, like the comparison lands exactly where I meant it to. For a moment I think he might argue, might finally let me finish making my case. He doesn't. He leaves the room instead, and within the hour I learn he has already arranged transport back to the capital, gone before I even get the chance to argue further. Tavian finds me at the clinic 2 days later, and this time nothing stops him from finishing what he started in the garden. He tells me everything. Marith threatened to close the clinic and accuse me of manipulating vulnerable alpha patients unless he chose Corin at the ceremony. He believed, in whatever twisted calculation grief and fear produce, that losing me publicly was the only way to keep me safe. I told myself it was the brave thing to do, he says, voice cracking somewhere in the middle. Sacrifice myself so you'd be untouched. I didn't realize until it was already done that I hadn't sacrificed anything. I just handed the decision to her and let you pay for it. You didn't just hand her the decision, I say. You handed her mine too. And you never once thought to ask if I wanted to be protected that way. He has no answer for that either. Nobody ever does, when it's true. A package arrives at the clinic 3 days after Kale leaves. No note on the outside. Nothing to indicate who sent it until I open it and find every story I ever told him. Handwritten from memory, page after page in a hand I recognize instantly from every order and document I've watched him sign. On the final page, just one line. I left because I want you more than I trust myself not to take what you would willingly give. Beneath the words, an address in the Western Crown capital. And beneath that, 5 more words that stop my breath entirely. One survivor is still alive. Chapter 6. One survivor is still alive, and I am on a transport headed for the Western Crown capital before the ink on that sentence has even finished drying in my mind. The address leads me to a narrow street behind the royal quarter, and I find Kale before I find anyone else, standing in the doorway of a modest house like he already sensed me coming from 3 blocks away. He looks worse than he did the night I met him. His eyes are sunk deep, his hands wrapped in cloth to hide fresh scratches, and the burned edge under his scent has grown so strong I can smell it from the street. You shouldn't have come, he says. You shouldn't have left. He keeps 3 feet of distance between us, deliberate, the same 3 feet he kept the first night in the ceremony hall, except this time it feels like punishment instead of respect. I'm not doing this because I stopped wanting you here, he says. I'm doing it because I'm dying slower with you gone than I would be dying faster with you close enough to trade lives with me. That's not your choice to make. It's the only choice I have left that doesn't end with you buried. Something in me finally snaps loose. 2 years of Tavian's silence, and now Kale's control colliding into one exhausted, furious truth I have been swallowing since the ceremony hall. You are doing exactly what he did, I say. Tavian lied to protect me. You're leaving to protect me. Different methods, same result. Neither of you ever once asked whether I wanted that kind of protection. I am asking now. No, you decided and then told me about it after. He flinches like I've struck him, and for the first time since I met him, the composed Regent disappears completely, leaving only a man who has not slept a full night in 18 months and is running out of ways to survive the ones he does get. I am terrified of loving you. I tell him, my voice shaking in a way I hate. I already know what it feels like to be wanted in private and abandoned the second wanting me becomes difficult. But I am more terrified of finding out years from now that I walked away because you decided, all on your own, that I was too fragile to choose for myself. He crosses the distance between us in 2 steps, close enough now that I can feel the heat coming off him, close enough that his hand hovers near my jaw without landing. I want you as a mate, he says low, raw, as a partner, as the only thing that has made the last 2 weeks bearable. And some nights, when it's at its worst, part of me is tempted to take the full bond anyway, even knowing what it would cost you. That part of me terrifies me more than the fire does. His honesty should frighten me. It does frighten me. But it also proves something I needed proof of, that he is no longer hiding behind the performance of perfect self-sacrifice, that whatever this is between us, he is finally willing to be seen inside it instead of managing it alone. Our faces are close enough now that one more inch would close the distance completely. Do you want this? He asks. Or is the pathway between us deciding for you? I don't have an answer yet, not one I trust enough to give him, and he reads that in my silence and steps back before either of us can pretend otherwise. We are still standing there, breath uneven, when the door behind him opens and an old man with a cane and a face lined by more than age steps out onto the small porch. "Wiley Boone," Cale says, and something shifts in his posture, bracing itself. This is the man from the file. Wiley looks at me for a long moment, at the cuff link on my wrist, and something in his expression breaks open. "You have his eyes," he says. "Your father's. I'd know them anywhere." He put me on his back and carried me through that tunnel when my leg wouldn't hold my weight anymore. My throat closes around everything I want to ask. "There were 9 of us," Wiley continues. "Your father went back in twice. The second time, the ceiling near the east wing had already started to fall. He told us not to wait for him, and we didn't, and I have hated myself every day since for listening." He pauses, and his cane taps once against the porch floor, a small nervous habit he doesn't seem to notice himself doing. "I've carried that guilt for a long time," he says, "living when others didn't. I understand something about what your Regent is carrying, even if the shape of it is different." "He got out," I say, because I have to say it, because I have spent 6 years assuming the answer without ever confirming it. "He lived another 6 years after that fire." "He never told you what happened that night?"
No.
"Because the men who caused the delay were still in power. Naming it would have cost him his life, and possibly cost you yours." Cale's jaw tightens at that, guilt visibly resettling itself across his face, and Wiley turns toward him with none of the deference I would expect from a man addressing the Regent of the Western Crown. "It wasn't only your order that killed the ones who didn't make it," Wiley says. "I have a document. Kept it hidden for years, waiting for someone with enough power to actually use it." He sets a sealed folder on the small table beside the door, and Cale opens it with hands that are not steady at all. The authorization signature at the bottom belongs to Meredith Reed. Chapter 7. The authorization signature belongs to Meredith Reed, and Cale reads it 3 times like the letters might rearrange themselves into someone else's name if he stares hard enough. "She approved the delay order," he says, quiet, like the words are still assembling themselves into something he can believe. "Not just the territorial restriction I obeyed. She specifically authorized withholding confirmation for an extra 90 minutes after the first distress call came in." His hand tightens on the edge of the folder until his knuckles go white, and I watch him do the math in real time. 90 minutes against a burning roof, 90 minutes he spent believing were entirely his fault. Wiley nods once. "She's been feeding you falsified reports ever since. Every summary claiming no one escaped. Every reminder that immediate action would have saved everyone. She needed you carrying that guilt, Regent. A man convinced he's a murderer doesn't ask hard questions about who actually gave the order." I watch something break open in Cale's face. Not relief. Not yet. Something closer to rage finally finding a target after 18 months of turning inward instead. "I obeyed a restriction I should have challenged," he says. "That part is true. I own that. But she built an entire architecture of lies on top of it to keep me exactly where she needed me." "Both things can be true," I tell him. "Your failure and her manipulation. One doesn't cancel the other out." He looks at me like that sentence just unlocked something he has been trying to solve alone in the dark for a year and a half. We don't sleep that night. We sit at Wiley's kitchen table cross-referencing his hidden testimony against the falsified summaries Cale has kept locked in his private files. And by the time the sun comes up, the shape of what Meredith built is undeniable. Every report bears the same careful phrasing, the same emphasis on speed and blame, engineered by someone who understood exactly how guilt works on a man determined to hold himself accountable for everything. Cale reaches for my hand across the table, not asking permission with words this time, just offering his palm and waiting. I take it. "I don't want to survive this by hiding what I feel for you anymore," he says. "Whatever it costs me politically. I'm done deciding things about you in the dark and calling it protection." I don't answer with words. I close the distance between us myself, and when our mouths finally meet, it isn't hesitant the way I expected. He cups my face like I am something he has been afraid to believe he was allowed to touch, waiting a full breath before I lean in first, letting me set the pace even as his whole body strains toward closing it faster. The kiss turns hungry when I fist my hand in his coat, when my scent opens toward him without my permission, and for one dangerous second I feel the pull of something larger trying to form between us, the mate pathway straining toward completion. We break apart before it can, both breathing hard, both aware of exactly how close we came. Not yet, he says, forehead against mine. Not until we know it won't kill you. Not yet, I agree. Doesn't mean not ever. The moment doesn't last. Kale's communication device lights up violently on the table, one message after another stacking faster than he can read them, and his face goes from flushed to ash pale in the space of 10 seconds. What is it? I ask. He turns the screen toward me. A recording is circulating across every PAC network in the Western Territories. Doctored footage showing me with my hands on Kale during one of our private sessions, my scent visibly active, framed to look exactly like manipulation rather than medicine. The caption accuses me of exploiting an impaired Regent for political influence. Comments are already stacking beneath it by the hundreds, strangers deciding who I am from 4 seconds of edited video, and something old and familiar tightens in my chest, the same helplessness I felt standing at the ceremony while 300 wolves refused to look at me. She moved fast. I say, my stomach turning over. She moved first, Kale corrects, because she knew we were getting close to the truth. Within the hour, Marith files formal charges against me for medical exploitation of a ranking alpha. Hollis is arrested before noon for allowing an undocumented treatment inside clinic walls, dragged out in front of patients who have trusted him for a decade. His hands cuffed while he tells them all to stay calm and keep to their appointments as if none of this is happening to him. Kale receives a formal order from the bonding council, the very body Marith chairs, demanding he publicly deny any relationship with me or face an emergency review of his regency within 72 hours. They're moving to remove you, I say. They're moving to protect themselves, Kale says. Removing me is just the tool. That evening, Kale is placed in front of a live territorial broadcast, cameras arranged in a tight arc around him, council members flanking him on either side like an honor guard that is actually a cage. Lights burn hot against his face. A moderator reads the question exactly as Meritha's office drafted it, designed to end this in one clean denial. Did the Omega exploit your illness? Kale looks directly into the lens instead of at the council beside him. No, he says. But the council did. Chapter 8. But the council did hangs in the air of the broadcast studio for 3 full seconds before anyone moves, and I watch on a screen in the waiting room as every council member's face goes rigid at once. Kale doesn't stop there. He tells the cameras everything: the 90-minute delay Marith authorized, the falsified survivor reports, the 9 hidden names, the altered bonding records that stripped Omegas of their true designations to funnel them into profitable contracts. He does not soften his own part in it, and he does not let the council members beside him interrupt, holding up one hand each time one of them tries. I obeyed an order I should have questioned, he says, voice steady even as his hands are not. That failure is mine and I will answer for it. But I did not act alone in building the guilt that kept me silent for 18 months. Someone needed me broken enough not to look too closely at who actually gave the order to wait. I am called forward not long after, standing in front of the same cameras, and I tell them about the missing pages in my own file, about a designation quietly altered within a month of my father's death, so that no one would ever connect a defective, unmarriageable Omega to the man who saved 9 lives the official record insists never existed. Hollis testifies next, still in restraints they have not yet removed, admitting on record that he allowed pages to disappear because Marith controlled the clinic's funding and he was afraid of what would happen to his patients if it closed. His voice breaks once, just once, when he says that silence protected him more than it ever protected anyone else. Corin arrives in the middle of the hearing, pushing past 2 guards who clearly were not told to let him through, and stands in front of the council to reject his mating contract with Tavian on live broadcast, his voice carrying farther than I have ever heard it carry before. I remained in this arrangement because I believed staying close to her records would help me find a way to protect my brother, he says, voice shaking but not stopping. I was wrong. Fear kept me quiet longer than it should have, and I am done letting it decide what I say. Tavian follows him, supplying private messages from Maritha's own device, records instructing him explicitly to choose Corin at the ceremony or watch the clinic and everyone in it suffer the consequences. I do not use my turn at the podium for revenge. I have more than enough evidence sitting in front of me to spend the whole broadcast destroying the woman who erased my father and tried to erase me. Instead, I talk about every Omega whose designation was quietly altered the way mine was, funneled into unequal contracts they never chose, and I ask the council to open every one of those files before another life gets buried under someone else's ambition. Marith stands to answer the charges herself, composed even now, her voice carrying the same practiced calm I have watched her use for years. Political bonds prevent territorial conflict, she says. I made difficult choices to protect this pack's stability. Does individual happiness truly outweigh the safety of thousands? A peace that requires powerless people to surrender their choices, I answer, is not peace. It is quiet violence wearing a formal title. Something shifts across the room at that, a stillness that feels different from the stillness before, like people are finally hearing a sentence they have needed to hear for years. Kale stands and formally relinquishes his emergency immunity, agreeing to an independent investigation into his own conduct alongside Maritha's, knowing full well it could cost him the regency entirely. Maritha's composure finally cracks. Before the guards can reach her, she turns toward Kale with something venomous in her voice. You think exposing me saves you? The sleeping treatment my counsel prescribed you for 18 months was never harmless. It carries a compound designed to intensify fear memory and weaken wolf stability. I did not just manipulate your guilt, Regent. I have been poisoning you since the week you took the throne. Every part of me goes cold hearing it, the pieces snapping into a shape uglier than anything I had let myself imagine. 18 months of a man being fed his own destruction by the very institution that was supposed to protect him. The room erupts into noise, guards moving, council members shouting over each other. And Kale's face goes through something I have never seen on him before, understanding landing like a physical blow. His knees buckle before anyone can catch him. I am moving before I finish deciding to, shoving past a guard to reach him as he goes down fully, his breathing shallow, his skin gone cold under my hands. The royal physician arrives seconds later, running diagnostics with trembling fingers, her instruments beeping in a pattern I don't recognize and don't like, and when she finally looks up at me, her face has lost every trace of clinical calm. I can't find his wolf, she says. It isn't just weak. I'm reading nothing at all. She looks between the two of us, then at the notes in her hand, then back at Kale's still body. A full bond might restart it immediately, she says. But completing that bond could still kill you. Chapter 9. Completing that bond could still kill you is not a sentence I let sit in the room for more than a second before I am already shaking my head. There's another way, I say. There has to be. The physician starts to explain why there isn't, and I cut her off because I have spent the last 2 hours watching a system built entirely on people deciding things for other people, and I am not going to let this be one more version of that, even with good intentions behind it. I designed the procedure myself, drawing on everything I know from 6 years stabilizing wolves in crisis. A controlled partial bond, not the full pathway, paired with medical detoxification to purge whatever remains of the compound in his system. Wiley's testimony read aloud to ground him in truth instead of the falsified guilt Marith engineered, and a guided entry into Kale's wolf consciousness that I control and can withdraw from at will. The physician argues that nothing like this has ever been attempted successfully. I tell her that nothing about the last 2 weeks has followed precedent either, and precedent is exactly what let a woman poison a regent for 18 months without anyone questioning the paperwork. Eventually, she agrees to monitor rather than block. We move Kale to a private recovery room, and I kneel beside the table where he lies unresponsive. His wolf silent under my palm the way it was the very first night I touched him, except now I understand exactly what silence like that means. I close my eyes and let the partial pathway between us open on my terms. The world tips sideways and reforms into smoke. I am standing outside a burning shelter that exists only in memory, heat rolling off it in waves that shouldn't be able to touch me and somehow do anyway. 27 shapes stand between me and the door, faces indistinct, voices overlapping into a single accusing hum that presses against my chest like a physical weight. Kale is there too, younger, frozen, trying again and again to walk toward the fire and being pulled back each time by hands I can't see. "Let me in," he says, to no one, to everyone. "Let me finish what I started." I don't tell him it wasn't his fault. That would be a lie, and lies don't survive inside a shared wolf consciousness. They just curdle and make everything worse. Instead, I turn him bodily toward the side of the building he has never once looked at in 18 months of reliving this night, a narrow maintenance door half hidden by smoke. "Look," I say. 9 figures move through it. A 10th, larger, carrying a smaller shape on his back, goes back in twice before the ceiling gives. "That's my father," I tell him. 9 people walked out of that door because of him. You didn't save all 27. Neither did he. But you didn't kill all 27 either. And you have spent 18 months letting one truth erase the other. Kale stares at the door like he is seeing the whole night for the first time instead of the version Marith built for him, one falsified report at a time. "I hesitated," he says. "That's real. People suffered because of 90 minutes I didn't fight hard enough to shorten." "That's real," I agree. And it isn't the whole story either. Something in him finally settles. Not peace. Not yet. But the first crack of daylight through a door that has been sealed for a year and a half. He turns from the burning building and, for the first time in this memory, chooses to walk away from the fire instead of trying to die inside it. The ground beneath us shudders. I feel the pathway between us start to destabilize, pulling harder than the controlled version I built, threatening to widen into something neither of us designed. Kale could hold on to me right now through instinct and dominance alone, could keep me trapped here with him whether I chose it or not. He doesn't. He releases me deliberately, fully, even as I watch the effort it costs him to do it. I choose to stay one more second anyway, just to press my forehead against his in whatever form we take here, and then I let the pathway pull me back toward my own body. I return because I choose to, not because anyone decided it for me. When I open my eyes in the recovery room, Kale's chest is rising and falling in a steady rhythm it hasn't held in 18 months, and beneath my palm, faint but unmistakable, his wolf is breathing again. He wakes slowly, blinking against the light, and the first thing he does is find my hand and ask, quietly, for permission to deepen the bond just slightly further, enough to hold, not enough to risk what almost broke us both. I give it. What happens next is not something I have words ready for even now, only the memory of his hands finally steady against my skin, of scent and breath and trembling closeness that never once stops being a choice either of us could have ended, of being wanted without being owned for the first time in my life. Afterward, Kale's wolf speaks through him, low and clear, the first full sentence it has managed in 18 months. Then everything goes dark, and I lose consciousness completely. I wake hours later in an unfamiliar bed, alone, the sheets cool on the side where he should be, reaching instinctively for the thread of the bond that should still be humming faintly beneath my ribs. I feel nothing. For one terrifying moment, certain he is dead, I cannot make myself breathe. Chapter 10. For one terrifying moment, certain he is dead, I stay frozen, until the door opens and Kale walks through it on his own 2 feet, pale but upright, alive. "You closed the bond," I say, half accusation, half relief so sharp it makes my voice crack. "While you were unconscious," he admits. I felt what was left of the compound still moving through what remained of the pathway between us. "I closed it from my side before it could reach you. I didn't decide anything about your life this time. I protected what we already built together. I let that distinction land the way it's meant to, the difference between control disguised as care and an actual partnership finally learning its own shape. The weeks that follow move fast in some places and unbearably slow in others. Marith is formally indicted for record falsification, medical poisoning, coercive bonding practices, and obstruction of the shelter investigation. Every altered bonding contract across 3 territories is suspended pending independent review, an effort that will take years but has, for the first time, actually begun. Corin visits me at the clinic once it reopens under new independent funding, apologizing without demanding I forgive him on the spot, and I tell him honestly that I need time before I can promise him what our relationship becomes next. He accepts that. It's the first time he's ever accepted a boundary of mine without trying to soften it into something easier for himself, and I let myself believe that might actually mean something has changed in him, not just in the world around us. Tavian cooperates fully with the investigation and relinquishes any claim to Cedar Harbor leadership. He finds me once more before I leave for the capital, standing exactly where he stood the day he told me he loved me for the first time. "I did love you," he says. "You loved me," I answer. "But you loved your fear more. I forgive what you were too frightened to become. I won't go back to the life your fear tried to build for me." He nods, and for the first time in 2 years, there is nothing left unsaid between us. No secret midnight visits. No promise waiting to be broken. Just an ending clean enough to finally close. Cale is permitted to retain the Regency on a provisional basis, on the condition that he complete formal trauma treatment and continue the medical detoxification his body still needs. He begins both without complaint, without hiding the difficulty of it from me the way he once hid everything that made him look less than perfectly composed. I refuse to become his permanent private healer. I tell him that directly, the first week he's strong enough to hear it without flinching. "I love you," I say. "That doesn't mean my whole life becomes managing your recovery. I have work of my own, patience of my own. A life I get to keep building, separate from what I am to you. I would never ask you to give that up," he says. "I'm asking you to let me build a life next to yours instead of one that swallows it." Several months pass before he arrives at Cedar Harbor Recovery Clinic without guards, without ceremony, just a tired, healing man standing in a doorway asking if he can come home, not as the Regent, not as someone's patient, but as my partner. "On one condition," I tell him. "Name it." The Crown funds independent clinics for Omegas across every territory. Places where care doesn't require a sponsor, a contract, or anyone's permission but the person asking for help. He smiles, the real one now, the one that reaches all the way to his eyes. "The legislation is already drafted," he says, "using your recommendations." I was hoping you'd say yes before I had to explain that part. The first of those clinics opens on a bright afternoon 6 months later, and Wiley stands in the front row beside the other 8 survivors my father carried out of a fire that was never supposed to have anyone left to remember it. I learn, finally, that he didn't save everyone. Neither did Cale's better instincts, back when it mattered most. But the 9 people standing in front of me are not nothing. They are proof that failing to save everyone never erases the ones who were saved. That truth settles into me the same way it settled into Cale, slow and steady, the kind of healing that doesn't announce itself with fireworks. That night, Cale wakes from a nightmare, his breath ragged, his hand already reaching before his eyes fully open. He doesn't apologize. He doesn't pull away or hide it from me the way he once tried to hide every soft, unguarded piece of himself. "Please stay," he says. I do. He still dreams of the fire sometimes. But now, when he wakes, he no longer faces the smoke alone, and neither do I face the silence I used to mistake for safety. Love was never supposed to mean deciding what someone else could survive. It was supposed to mean telling the truth, making room, and asking the person you love to stay, and trusting them enough to let them answer for themselves. If this story moved something in you, stay close, because there is another one waiting. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story built to inspire you the way this one was meant to. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me which moment hit you hardest, and share this with someone who needs a reminder that healing is always still possible. I'll see you in the next one. The end.